Welcome to our Fireside Chat. We're delighted that you have joined us this noonday hour. We're blessed today to have Kellie Butsack, the Associate Director of Alzheimer's Association. We look forward to a wonderful conversation. But before we begin, let us have a word of prayer. This is a day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Gracious God, we are thankful for this day that you've allowed us to receive your mercy. We know that morning by morning, new mercies are ours to see. Bless us now as we have this conversation. May, oh God, it strengthen your people. Grant to us, oh God, additional knowledge, insight of how we can help those with this illness as well as help ourselves. So bless, oh God, every word that comes forth out of our mouths and out of our heart, we pray.
Amen.
Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We are delighted that you have consented to come. This Fireside Chat is something we have been doing over a number of weeks, and we look forward to a wonderful conversation today. So tell us a little bit about yourself and about what you do with the Alzheimer's Association.
Well, thank you, Pastor Quann. First of all, I'd like to thank you and the church for hosting me today, and I really want to thank your Precious Memories Ministry volunteers for their interest and commitment to helping us extend outreach to the Bethlehem Baptist community. As you mentioned, I'm currently in the role of Associate Director of Programs for the Association for our Delaware Valley chapter, which serves our southeast region here of Pennsylvania. And really my job is primarily outreach, programs and services to the community to support and educate and connect to resources, not only individuals who may have a diagnosis, individuals who may have concerns about their memory, but also their family members who are serving in caregiver roles and trying to support them. And we also support our professional caregivers in the region who are providing care for individuals in long-term care settings and different care providers.
I'm also appreciative of the Precious Memory Ministry led by one of our faithful deacons, Deacon Dolores Parks, and all those who are part of that ministry. I don't have to tell you how difficult this subject is, because unfortunately, we have a lot of fears, a lot of intimidations regarding it, and we don't talk about it too much. So can you tell us about some of the symptoms and how we as a church can help in that regard?
Absolutely, and thank you for asking. As you may know, Alzheimer's disease, we are called the Alzheimer's Association, but really our longer title is the Alzheimer's Disease and Related Disorders Association. So we also support individuals who are living with other forms of dementia beyond Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is the most prevalent cause of dementia. So that's why the terminology is sometimes used interchangeably. But most people think of Alzheimer's and other dementias as memory loss. And it is true that short-term memory loss is one of the early signs or symptoms of the disease. And when we categorize that memory loss with dementia, what we're really talking about is memory loss short-term that affects our ability to function daily. So, you know, many of us will say tongue-in-cheek that we misplace our keys all the time, or you know, once in a while we'll walk into a room and forget why we're there. And those things can be normal, you know, a normal part of aging. But in someone who does not have a disease process like dementia happening in their brain, those those individual moments of forgetfulness, we rebound from them. And there are clues in our environment that kind of trigger the memory, and we eventually find the keys. We eventually remember why we came into a room or what we were looking for. Someone who really has a physiological disease process happening in their brain cannot recall what they're forgetting, and it starts to affect how they can function daily. So they're forgetting to eat, or they're forgetting to groom themselves, and things that they're forgetting, they can never recall. So the memories aren't coming back, and nothing can trigger that. So that's the real difference. When we start to see in our friends and our families and our neighbors, when we start to see a level of memory loss where they're not taking care of themselves, or maybe they're forgetting how to do something that they've done all their life, that should really be second nature or habit to them, and they can no longer remember, that should be a red flag that maybe there's something more going on than just normal aging. And that's typically when we will talk to individuals and encourage individuals to make a doctor appointment, and seek some medical diagnosis.
Are there any medications that help in that early stage?
There are. Right now, we currently have 4 medications that are approved, FDA approved, to be prescribed. And most of them are prescribed for the Alzheimer's type dementia. There are some additional medications, different medications that might be prescribed for Parkinson's, to manage tremors and physical symptoms. But most of the medications that are currently approved really are meant for the Alzheimer's type of dementia. And the most common one is called Aricept. Another common one is called Namenda. So many people who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease are taking Aricept or Namenda, or a combination of the two. But what's important for people to know and understand is that the medications that we currently have are prescribed to help manage the symptoms of the disease and not the disease itself. So there are currently no treatment options for changing the course of the disease or stopping the progression of the disease. Even with the medication, the disease will continue to progress for the individual. So we don't have, people with Alzheimer's disease, we don't have a medication that can help them or put them in remission. Right now for us, unfortunately, there's no way of stopping it once it starts. But the medications we do have are meant to work with the chemical messengers in the brain that naturally occur, and to help delay the progression or slow the progression of the disease, and give the person more time to plan for the future, to give them some more alertness early on, and really delay the progression so that they can kind of extend quality of life.
Another question I want to ask, is there a
Yeah.
particular age in which one may see that taking place, as well as what is the prevalence in terms of minority communities?
Absolutely. There are 2 types of Alzheimer's disease itself. Most individuals, the majority of individuals, and right now in this country, we have over 5 million individuals who are diagnosed with what we call late onset Alzheimer's disease. And that is categorized in individuals diagnosed who are 65 years of age or older. There is a second subset of individuals with Alzheimer's disease that are called young onset. And there's about 500,000 statistically in this country who are diagnosed with young onset today. Young onset can be diagnosed in an individual. I think the youngest person to date was 38 years old. So anywhere Typically young onset is diagnosed when someone is in their 40s or 50s prior to age 65. So there are two types of Alzheimer's disease. In terms of the disparities across different ethnic groups with Alzheimer's disease, we find that the Hispanic Latino population is about 1.5 times as likely to develop dementia later in life compared to the white Caucasian group. And for African Americans, the rate is about 2 times more likely. And as far as current research goes, some of these disparities are part of lifestyle choices. I don't believe research has yet pinpointed that there is anything genetic about being Latino or African American that predisposes you to the disease. But a lot of the disparities in the statistics relate to other lifestyle choices that may contribute to our risk.
Hereditary. Can you pass it? Is it passed down from one generation to another?
It can be. There have been, I think to date, we have 3 specific genes that are linked to Alzheimer's disease. When you look at the overall population of those affected, it's less than 15% that have a genetic predisposition, but there are some cases. And in those cases, we see one of the most common genetic links for Alzheimer's disease is in the population that has young onset. So someone, for example, let's say someone is diagnosed with young onset Alzheimer's disease in their 40s or 50s. Their children, the next generation, have a 50% risk of developing the disease as well. So we see more of a genetic predisposition in the younger population that is affected.
I remember when cancer was not something that people spoke about.
Yep.
How are you able to help families and caretakers provide care for those loved ones who are going through that right now?
Well, thank you for asking. The Alzheimer's Association is a standard 501c3 nonprofit. So I will start by saying the one thing that we do not do is provide direct care. So we don't have doctors and nurses and therapists and people that we send out to a home to care for someone. But like a lot of other nonprofits, our mission is really focused on, as we talked about, increasing awareness and conversation about the disease. And then we do a lot of education around the disease. So most people that are facing Alzheimer's and or other types of dementia really don't go into it being well-versed or knowing a lot about it. So we spend a lot of time, and one of our primary services is providing education, not only to the people who are serving as caregivers, but also to the individuals themselves that may have a diagnosis or have concerns. So we have a broad menu of different education topics that we offer, from the beginning of what are the 10 warning signs, all the way through, how do we manage the behavioral symptoms of the disease? How do we maintain communication with individuals that have the disease as it progresses? So we have a vast menu of different topics that we provide education on. The other, probably our number one program or service that we provide is our 24/7 helpline. And it's a toll-free number. It is manned by master's level clinicians and counselors 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And anyone can call that line, whether it's someone who just wants to know more about the disease, or an individual who may have concerns about their own memory, or maybe they have a diagnosis. It could be a family caregiver. It could be a professional. We get a lot of calls from professionals, social workers, nurses who are trying to help patient families, and they call us for resources. So anyone can call that 800 number any time of the day or night with a question or advice or to learn more about resources. Another service that we provide is our system of support groups. So we have, right now across our chapter region, we have over 100 support groups for caregivers that generally on average meet monthly. There are some that meet more frequently, but most of them meet at least once a month. And of course, pre-COVID, they were meeting in person at different locations across the region. We've had support groups in long-term care settings. We have support groups in churches. We have support groups at libraries, all different type of public settings. And of course, now that since we've been in COVID now since last March, our support groups are not currently meeting in person because of the disease guide or the pandemic guidelines. But we still have right now this day about 36 support groups who are offering virtual meetings monthly. And hopefully someday soon, when we come out of the pandemic and we go back to being able to do things in person, we will be back up to, many more support groups meeting monthly around the area. So we have our support groups. And then finally, we are, or I shouldn't say finally, there's a lot that we do, but I will wrap it up by saying we also help connect individuals to resources in the community. So if we have someone who calls and maybe they have concerns about their memory but they don't have a regular doctor they see, or they don't know, what kind of specialist to go to, we can help connect them to, where to go for diagnosis. Or maybe they need to know, maybe they need assistance with providing professional caregiving, in-home care or hospice or long-term residential communities. Or maybe they're looking for benefit like financial assistance, and maybe we can help them to see if they might be eligible for VA benefits, or maybe they can get some assistance through their local office of aging. So we are also a connector to other resources in the area that may be of help.
This conversation is more than just an educational session for myself. I believe with all my heart that most of us, if we're honest, know somebody with the illness and how we respond. And I was saddened when I heard one of the individuals, a member of our church, share with me that she had a loved one who had obviously been affected by the illness. And there were those who laughed and frowned and made fun of that individual. I think it's our insensitivity, and we don't talk too much about mental health. But would this also be in a classification of mental health?
It is not, actually. Alzheimer's disease and other dementias are not in the same category with mental health issues. And I'm not a mental health expert, so I can't really speak to how they categorize or distinguish between the two. But Alzheimer's and dementia really falls under a more chronic disease category. Because, and I think the main reason being, because all of the causes of dementia we have today, none of them are reversible. So we treat the symptoms, like I said, with the medications we have and the resources we have, but we cannot change the course of the disease. Just like, I'm trying to think of another chronic illness that can't be reversed. Dementia is one of the few, quite honestly. Whereas with mental illness, there is treatment that can actually reverse the effects. So somebody can recover from depression. They can recover from, certain mental illnesses with treatment. So I think that's what distinguishes dementia from mental illness. But I would agree with you that public perception is different. And when I talked earlier about when I mentioned the stigma that still exists today with Alzheimer's and dementia. It's because, you know, decades ago, dementia has really, I think, been around since the dawn of time. Anyone who is a fan of Shakespeare, if you think of his play King Lear, you know, King Lear, there's a statement in King Lear where he says, "I am not of myself." And so dementia has been around since the dawn of time. But it wasn't until the early 1900s, 1906, when Dr. Alzheimer actually identified it, physically identified it. So then Alzheimer's disease became known as what it is today because of his work. But yet, even though it was labeled, Alzheimer's disease was labeled way back in 1906, for decades, we still, individuals who were dealing with the symptoms or experiencing the disease still lived in the shadows. You know, their families would kind of keep them hidden in the home because they didn't want neighbors or friends to think their loved one was crazy. You know, so I think we've always had a public misperception of dementia. And again, you know, part of that stigma is that we label people as demented or crazy, or, you know, and I think that's where some people tend to think that there is a connection between what is true mental illness and what is true dementia.
So I want to ask something else, and
Mhm.
maybe I'm a dreamer, but is there any kind of thought or hope that the time will come that there will be a cure or relief? Is that thinking too much? I remember when polio was something that people didn't feel, even though, you know, or cancer for that matter. And but on the other hand, could you tell us a little about Dr. Alzheimer's?
Well, yes. In answer to the first part of your question, we always remain hopeful. And there is so much going on in research today. The Alzheimer's Association, we ourselves as an organization, we are the largest nonprofit funder of research into Alzheimer's disease and dementia in the world globally. Every year we host an international research conference. And I think people would be amazed how much really is going on in research, and a lot of different avenues that they're looking at in research. So they're looking at drug treatments, you know, and studying different drugs that might provide more effective actual treatment of the disease and not just the symptoms. But they're also doing studies on lifestyle, like I said, lifestyle choices and how that affects our risk, or how we can reduce our risk that way. And there's a lot of different things going on in research. And I think we made a pledge as an organization to find a more effective treatment by the year 2025. So we are very hopeful that we are very close to finding something that maybe not a be-all end-all cure, but hopefully a more effective treatment at this point, at least, if not short of a cure. To the second part of your question, Dr. Alzheimer was a German physician. And like I said, back in the early 1900s, a woman was brought to him who at the time was experiencing the classic symptoms of what we classify today as Alzheimer's disease. And he treated her for, I think, about 5 years. And interestingly, she was only 55 years old at the time. So she would have been considered young onset today. And he treated her for a period of years until she passed. And when she passed away, he actually did an autopsy of her brain. And that is where he identified, specific to Alzheimer's disease, what he identified happening in her brain, which we talk about today. The classic hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease are when plaques, amyloid plaques, and tau tangles develop in the brain and affect or destroy brain cells and affect how cells are able to communicate. And that's what he identified through the autopsy of her brain. And that's how the disease was named and how it became known as it is today.
Is there any kind of care that one would have with the illness in a nursing home or facility long term, or would they just be part of the total population?
No, there are many. Well, it depends on the facility. There are several options out there for individuals, and there are many care options even beyond residential care. So depending, and a lot of it depends on the individual, the behavioral symptoms that they're experiencing, the resources that the family has, all of those things play into those decisions. A lot of individuals can manage for a certain amount of time with home care and be able to live with the disease and manage the disease at home with their families. And then some individuals reach a point where the family and the home care, possibly the home care options, can no longer meet their needs, and then they might have to consider moving into a residential community. There are different levels of residential care. There is many of the assisted livings in our region have what they call memory care units or memory neighborhoods, where there is a specific level of care, and staff in those units usually have a little extra training when it comes to providing care for someone with dementia or Alzheimer's disease. And there are also, those memory care units also exist in skilled facilities as well. So it depends on, I think it really depends on the family's resources, what they can afford. Of course, unfortunately, most long-term residential care is not fully funded. There are some families are able to take advantage of Medicaid, medical assistance, with some of those placements, and others. There's also a veterans benefit that helps with those costs in assisted living facilities. So depending on resources and benefits that are available to an individual or family, all of that is taken into consideration when they're looking for care options.
This is really intriguing because you said something else in your last presentation about behavior. Mm-hmm. So is it just a loss of memory, or is it acts of behavior that are different and perhaps even at times violent?
Yes, part of the disease progression we call behavioral symptoms, a part of the disease. And it's probably the most challenging part of the disease for caregivers to manage. And the way we educate individuals on behavioral symptoms is that because of the way the disease progresses and the effects that it has on the brain, most individuals with dementia at some point on the journey will lose the ability, and over time will lose more and more of the ability to verbally communicate. Because there is a section of our brain that allows us to speak, and a section of our brain where our language is stored. So, from the time we're born, as we grow and mature, we learn our language and we learn how to recognize letters and words and form sentences. That's all learned behavior. So there's a section of the brain where all of that is stored. And when that part of the brain is destroyed or affected by the disease process, we lose that learned ability. So most individuals with dementia at some point, some earlier than others, will lose the ability or have difficulty, increasing difficulty, being able to verbally express themselves. So what we call behavioral symptoms really is the individual's attempt to communicate. So they don't, an individual with dementia who is having behavioral symptoms is not really purposefully acting out. They're trying to express something because they can't say it. So if, for example, if I was in pain and I couldn't tell somebody, my tooth hurts, I might, in order to get my point across, I might, go like this, and hit my jaw because, oh, I got pain in my tooth and I can't say it. I can't say my tooth hurts. So I may act it out. And we label those as behavioral symptoms. And that part of how we educate caregivers is to look for those clues. So if someone is starting to get frustrated or anxious or they're angry, a lot of those behaviors are driven by fear or pain, or are emotional at their core. And how do we help them resolve that? How do we help them resolve those feelings, which oftentimes will help to resolve the behavioral acts? So, so behaviors in dementia are really a form of communication. And we do a lot of educating on that topic because, like I said, it is really one of the most challenging issues for caregivers as well as for the individuals themselves. And it probably impacts a long segment of the journey. So someone with dementia, if they, someone who has a diagnosis of dementia the life expectancy after diagnosis can be anywhere from 5 to 15, 20 years. So if someone is living that long with dementia, they are likely to spend many of those years, or a good portion of those years, having to express themselves through behavior. So it is one of our more sought after topics in terms of education.
So would you recommend to all seniors they have a will so that they would not find themselves having the illness and not have made preparations for how they want to have their resources or whatever accumulation they've had in life to be cared for in a way that would allow them to have some participation in it?
Absolutely. And we actually, one of the many education topics that we offer is a legal and financial planning topic. And we do encourage, really all of us should have a will and a power of attorney in place from the time we're 18 on. As soon as we become a legal adult, we should all have that, because you never know what could happen tomorrow. And we only live in today. Today is the only day guaranteed. So we should all really do that. I know most of us don't, but we should. But we certainly encourage individuals, and even pre-diagnosis, even if they have concerns or they think that their symptoms might be, a true dementia, we encourage them to take those steps early in the process so that those plans are in place while they still have what is professionally called the capacity to assign that. If they do it earlier in the disease process, they can still be an active participant in their own care planning. And that's what we encourage them to be. We certainly don't want anyone to feel like they have their rights or wishes, taken over or taken away from them. We want them to make those plans early in the process so that they can actively be a part of that decision making.
So you mentioned also in terms of the length of time of one could have it 5, 10, 20 years. What have you seen to be on the average?
The average is probably 8 to 10. Now the young onset, and that's with the more common type of Alzheimer's disease, the late onset. We do tend to see a trend in the younger diagnosed population that it progresses a little more quickly. So someone with a young onset diagnosis who might be in their 40s or 50s, their average time in the disease is probably more 5 to 8. But the average overall, when you look at the overall diagnosed population, is about 8 to 10.
What have you seen in terms of the mental stability of a caretaker after 8 or 10 years?
It's caregiving for Alzheimer's and dementia is very tough, and it's very stressful. And we also do quite a bit of education with caregivers about caring for themselves or caring for the caregiver. Because it is, I mean, I will say, I certainly don't want to sound like caregiving for any other illness is not stressful or important. But dementia, because people in general are less well versed in dementia, it seems to be more stressful. And it is, with dementia, it's not just the physical aging of the person, it's also the cognitive deterioration of the person. And that's what really compounds the stress. But caregivers, I often find myself reminding caregivers, and not just family caregivers, but professionals as well, that they really need to, even though their goal is to provide the best care they can for their loved one or their resident or their patient, they really need to put themselves first in terms of providing care. Because if something were to happen to the caregiver, if the stress of caregiving affects their health, and makes them ill, then they can no longer provide the care they want to provide to their loved one. So they really need to take care of their own health first, so that they can, so that they can support their loved one.
How has that been in terms of not just providing form and education, but what about their faith? Has this been something that you've seen where people have responded out of their genuine faith on the educational process?
Absolutely, it is. And we talk about, we have a program that we provide on occasion. I'm not thinking of the right word right now that I want, but we have a program, an early stage support group program that we occasionally offer, I think like once or twice a year. And it's meant to include, unlike our caregiver support groups that are targeted just for the caregivers themselves, the early stage support group program actually involves the individual that also has the diagnosis. And what we do is we have the individual who's diagnosed, and we have their care partner, whether that be their spouse or an adult child or a neighbor, whoever it is for them. We bring them to the group together, and they learn together how to move forward and manage the disease. And the early stage support group is really for individuals who are in an earlier stage of the disease. Not necessarily that they are younger, but they're in an early stage of diagnosis. And one of the topics that we touch on in that program is spirituality, and how that plays a role in their being able to really accept their situation and be able to really draw strength from their faith and beliefs, whatever they may be, in terms of being able to really live with the disease. We're trying to change the mindset of the population, that individuals who are diagnosed are not dying from the disease, they are living with it. So we're trying to get people to look at it that way, in a more positive way. And because we really, the underlying theme of a lot of what we do is that we really want to help people maintain a quality of life, whether it's the individual who's diagnosed or it's the caregivers. Everybody deserves that quality of life. And it's interesting to me still today in 2020, now moving into 2021, that we have come so far with other illnesses. You mentioned earlier in our conversation about there was a time when cancer, the word cancer was taboo. And when you think about cancer today, when you ask somebody, what they think of or what their perception is of cancer today, It's a very proactive, I'm going to fight it, I'm going to beat it, and we're very proactive about other illnesses, about living with cancer, living with diabetes, living with heart disease. And yet we still, the perception of dementia is, that the person is dying, they're deteriorating, they're, slipping away, and they are, but they also have to live with it, because as we mentioned, someone can really live 5, 10, 15, 20 years with dementia. That's a long time to die. So, we want to encourage people to learn how to live with the disease and have the best quality of life.
Again, this is not an educational requirement in me or something I'm just going through the motion. I have a family member also who has illness. But the other thing is really near and dear. I'm blessed with a wonderful physician, my primary care doctor. And every year I have to go through this test, walk across the room a certain amount of time, give you words. You got to say those words backwards. And I think the last time I had one word out of place, that, and it's kind of like, and he thought that was good. But tell me again, how we feel when we have to take those exams, or when we forget our keys, as you already mentioned, or something else. We can't remember a name, or, and obviously, a period of time, then the name will come back to you or whatever. Yeah. So is that normal, or is that another sign of, okay, you're getting close?
That is normal. It is, as we learn more about dementia, as we increase awareness really about Alzheimer's and dementia, people become a little more in tune with it. And when we talk about, I think what you're referring to, I know Medicare, as part of their annual wellness visit now, includes a cognitive assessment, or should include a cognitive assessment. Right, the mini mental, as they call it, its nickname is the mini mental. I literally just sat through that with my mother earlier this week. She had a nurse come to the house, and part of what they do routinely is ask you to remember those 3 words, and maybe they ask you to draw a clock face, manual clock face, and it's certainly normal and understandable that any of us would be nervous about those test results. Unfortunately, because again, we don't have an effective treatment for dementia. So we, just as a general public, we know that if we get that diagnosis, it's going to be a long road, and right now, there's no way to stop it. And so it is a very emotional and difficult diagnosis to receive. And that's part of our job in being able to help individuals see it in a different light. And none of us want to, I personally don't want to get a cancer diagnosis either. I don't want any diagnosis of any chronic illness. But with dementia, there certainly is nervousness. There certainly is, an emotional response to that diagnosis for all of us, and for the caregivers as well. And I think that's what prevents a lot of people from really being proactive about it. And being able, so if we're worried, or we think that our symptoms are going down that path, or we receive that diagnosis, we've become very good at hiding it. And a lot of individuals, even with a diagnosis early on, are very good at disguising their symptoms and hiding it and not wanting to discuss it. And we really need to educate individuals on what are the important reasons for discussing it. And really, for me, it boils down to quality of life, because if you're open about it and you're proactive about it, it allows you to have those conversations with your family. It allows you to have those conversations with your doctor, to make plans for the future. And who knows, maybe we may get a diagnosis today, but maybe in the next 5 years we have a cure. So we have to, I think, always look at something proactively and hang on to that hope that I'm going to learn to live my best life with this disease, because, fingers crossed, there may be a cure for me, a few years down the road. And so I think what you mentioned about, going to the doctor and having those tests done and being a little anxious and worried about it. Yes, that is normal for all of us to be worried about that.
I want to be transparent again, and I'm blessed to have 4 sons, and I try to engage in conversation with them all the time. So I talk about a lot of different things. So just the other day, I had this conversation with my sons, and I'm getting to something in terms of whether or not we repeat ourselves. That's another sign. So I said to my sons, that I was going to get the vaccine on Saturday. And so I said, did I tell you that? Dad, you told me that. So I was wondering, okay, so is this repetition something else that is another sign, or is that a normal, particularly if you're talking a lot like I'm doing?
It can be either way. Repetition can be a symptom of dementia, but again, it can also be normal because we when we're very active, as I'm sure you are as a pastor and a husband and a father, we lead very active lives across the board for most of us, where we have family and personal things and work life and church life and all those things. And sometimes we just have, the brain can only remember so much, and can only handle so much in any given moment. And so sometimes us repeating things is just because we have so much on our plate and we're doing so much in terms of multitasking that we just, did I already say that? Okay, we'll move on. But so it can be normal. Most of the symptoms and what we talk about in our 10 warning signs program, the memory loss, the repetition, the personality changes, all of the things that we categorize as warning signs, really the key of what to look for in an individual is if it becomes more frequent, and if it is at a level where we cannot do our activities of daily living, where we can't just function normally. What is our baseline? What is our normal functioning from day to day? And when those symptoms start to affect that and start to affect the way that we can function on a daily basis, that's when it becomes more concerning. But it's very normal, for us. And as we get older, honestly, our brain is aging. Our brain is not immune to the aging process, just like the rest of our body. So we are going to, the brain is it's going to naturally slow down. That's normal because it's aging like the rest of our body is aging. So it may take us a little longer to remember something, or we may have to, I may have to literally look up an address or a phone number that used to be just in there. And now I can't pull it up, so I've got to look it up. But that can be part of the normal aging process. I think really the key point here is when we start to see someone that's no longer functioning normally, they're not, the memory loss is becoming more advanced, the repetition may be coming all the time, many times, frequently throughout the day, every day it's becoming more consistent. They're not taking care of that. They look like they're not taking care of themselves anymore. So they're not bathing, dressing, grooming, they're losing weight. So that, when we look at those normal activities of daily living, when we start to see those things fail, that's when those symptoms could be more concerning.
Cannot put into words how grateful I am for this conversation, as well as the ministry Precious Memories. I want to share with you something that I have not shared publicly before, and I will not disclose all the names, but I want to share with you because this conversation is not something that just happened out of the wind, it's the providence of God. And this individual who I will share has been a good friend of mine, has given so much to so many lives, so many people in this community. I just want to read a portion of this letter without, again, disclosing the full names. So for the sake of confidentiality, I will call his name John and Jill. I'm John, as you know me to be. I have been blessed so many ways with my career and my many years of marriage. We moved to a residential home, and after being there for a period of time, my wife, almost 70 years, became ill. She had a diagnosis as Alzheimer's. I owe much of my success to her. While my name normally appears in the work with nonprofits, I could not have done anything without her by my side. She is one of the most optimistic individuals I've ever met. And I would ask you, as my friend, to contribute to Alzheimer's in memory of her. I would also ask that you continue to keep all of those families with this illness in your heart and your mind. Thank you for being my friend. Keep on praying for me and my wife. Sincerely, John. July, I received this letter. We sent a contribution to Alzheimer's of $500. We will keep that on an ongoing basis. But again, it's very near to me. And I want to thank you so much for your sharing this afternoon. Thank God again for this ministry that's just launching. So is there anything you would like to say in parting?
I would like to say thank you to you, Pastor Quann, and to your Precious Memories Ministry volunteers, and to all of your congregation. We, the association gets credit from time to time for the work that we do, but really the work that we do is impossible without the contributions, not only financial, but the time and talents and treasures of so many in our communities that really help us to expand the outreach. We couldn't do what we do, without you and without your community and without all the communities. So we are very blessed and fortunate to have all of you on our side, as we move forward, and we will continue to fight, to make a change, in this disease, moving forward, and hopefully, really sooner than later. I know that is my hope, my personal hope for myself, for my children, for future generations. My mother has Parkinson's, which is another type or cause of dementia. So, many of us, even on staff at the association, are touched, not only professionally, but personally. And like you said earlier, there are so many people diagnosed with this disease that it's hard to find someone who isn't touched or doesn't know someone. And it may not be in their family or immediate family, but it may be a friend or a neighbor or their church family. So we appreciate beyond words what you and your congregation can do to help us continue the fight and further the fight. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to the information session that I know is coming up on Sunday, the 24th. And hopefully, some people will come forward and ask questions and get involved and get support.
Thank you so much. And we will certainly commit at least $1,000 this year for the association. Will send it to you, and prayerfully this information and inspiration can be given to all of our members. Because before this life is over, all of us will be dealing with someone, hopefully not ourselves, but someone who has this illness. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this time, this hour of power in which we have been blessed to hear from this your servant. We pray, oh God, that blessings upon her and upon the entire Alzheimer's Association, upon our Precious Memories Ministry. The lives of your people might be touched in a way that they will know that they're not alone. So bless us, keep us under your watchful care, we pray. Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank
Join
you,
us again.
Pastor Quann.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. God bless.